For Dr. Rebecca Price, practicing resilience and practicing design are deeply interconnected, two sides of the same coin, if you will. Dr. Price, who is now a senior lecturer in industrial design at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, is also the co-founder of the Resilient Designers Project, a groundbreaking initiative from WDO educational member Delft University of Technology that sparked a global conversation on what it means to build resilience as a creative practice. Drawing on her award-winning research, this session offers grounded insights for designers at every stage of their careers, from how to manage uncertainty and navigate creative pressure to sustaining long-term practice in fast-changing contexts. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello to this talk on cultivating resilience for pioneering change. My name is Dr. Rebecca Price, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of New South Wales in Australia. And I want to wish you all a very happy Industrial Design Day. A big thank you to the World Design Organization for allowing me to talk to you today. And I hope this talk is inspiring, instructive, and let's get started. So I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands upon which the University of New South Wales is located. So the Bedegal, the Gadigal, and the Naganwal peoples. And these are the traditional owners of this land. And I want to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging of these particular lands. So we're talking about resilience today. Why designers need resilience. Often we're talking about resilience from the perspective of what designers can do for other people, but actually my research goes a little bit the other direction and says, well, how do we keep ourselves resilient as we tackle really difficult challenges in the world? And I want to acknowledge my co-author, Mika van der Brouwer, for helping and being a great partner on this journey. So I'm on an academic mission to train resilient designers. And the reason is we're going to need the best designers we can to address some of the biggest and hardest challenges facing society. And it's not just that they can design well, but they can also keep themselves well as they design for difficult change they'd like to see in the world. So for the last 6 years, I've been doing all sorts of events and research into learning about how design makes us feel vulnerable. What are the impacts of really striving for impact in your career? How this plays out psychologically for people, the particular types of adversities they face as they design. And here's a little bit of a collection of some of the events that I've been doing. So lots of workshops with students, practitioners, educators, and PhD candidates, but also running a master program, running it through revision, and lots of student advocacy. And a little bit later in my talk, I will tell you more about the 10 principles for cultivating resilience as a designer. But before we go there, I kind of want to set the scene because designing the world, the improvements you'd like to see in the world, that is really difficult work. Have you ever had a really good and a really just idea that might bring about really important change in the world and faced negative feedback when you presented your idea? You might have had this experience, and if you haven't, well, you might in the future. And there's a reason why, even when we have good and just feedback on, for example, problems like this, the accumulation of plastics, single-use plastics that accumulate in the ocean and affect the livelihoods of people, far from the consumption of that plastic, by the way, as well, that in fact, even if you had a good idea to remedy this, to address it in some way, there might still be resistance to that idea simply because you're challenging an undesirable system to change. So you might be told something like, no, not interested, you're dreaming, you're crazy. And what I really want to impart and instill in you as early as I can is that we need to understand negative events and negative feedback in the design process as a system performance from which we can learn and from which we can grow. There are other reasons why designers need to be resilient. So I've spoken about critique that we face from systems, but we also need to be resilient because we have to collaborate with lots of different people from different backgrounds. We have this constant pressure to be creative. There's also a resilience around becoming a designer, not knowing necessarily what your identity is and what particular way of designing you would like to undertake. And then there's the resilience that comes from having a career where you're trying to or striving to generate impact on the planet, on people that you care about, on society. And that is difficult work that puts you under immense pressure at times and responsibility. So when I talk about resilience, it's important to sort of understand that this is a big umbrella term. So there are lots of different perspectives on what resilience means from the natural sciences and also from the social sciences. Let's have a little look now at some of those big definitions. So, from ecological resilience, the ability to absorb shocks and disturbances without shifting regimes. From engineering resilience, it's about this idea of a speed of return to equilibrium after disturbance, of self-organizing for complex systems resilience. And I think pertinent to this research is psychological resilience, which is around us as individuals, but also as community and our capacity to cope with adversities that we face as we design. So there are some process interactions between psychological resilience and designing, the process of designing that actually, really set the scene for why it's important for designers to cultivate resilience, but also how that could happen. So let's have a look at the process of psychological resilience. It's cyclic. So first you have a negative experience, and then you're able to sort of process that experience by talking about it and reflecting on it. And maybe understand that experience in a really different way that allows you to grow. For design, we also have a cyclic experience that's moving from our observations about things that need to be improved in the world to designing changes and testing them. So we're also learning through stimulating, let's say, feedback moments uh, that we can absorb and use to improve our design process. But there's also critique. So the thing about psychological resilience is it really asks us to adapt ourselves to undesirable contexts around us and just take that, as something that can be not changed by us. And if we critique design, it's very much around changing those contexts or improving the world around us, but forgetting about ourselves. So actually, there's a really nice shared ground here where practicing design could also help us practice and cultivate resilience. Likewise, cultivating resilience could help people who are not trained in design learn about improving the world around them also. So, what are some shared tools that sit in this interaction space? Well, cognitive flexibility, our ability to be able to hold lots of different ideas and think about the world from different perspectives. Our ability to reframe and understand problems from different perspectives, like I said, storytelling, our empathy and emotional self awareness, and our ability to make things, not just talk about them. So if I were to say, okay, what's a way of defining designer resilience as kind of a working hypothesis or something that could grow? Well, it's acknowledging that setbacks are inevitable if you want to have a career pioneering change, not just a career of doing the small jobs and pleasing people, but actually standing for change and impact in the world. And I talk about this idea of pioneering. It's going somewhere where nobody has been before, that there isn't a rule book or a playbook that you can follow. Bouncing back to reframe and learn from negative system feedback and performances. This is very important because we will always get, negative feedback, and that can be very powerful if we have the tools to cope with it. Growing a thicker skin over time. So this idea as you become more expert and more mature, you're able to sort of really feel more comfortable in design processes, and then being able to deliberately build peer networks because we're better together. Let's be honest. So, what have I discovered? And I don't want to go into the research process here because, of course, you can read about that, the types of studies that we did, how we performed the analysis. What I want to talk to you today is about the 10 principles. And when we developed the handbook, Mika and I, we gave that to students to test, and they said, and I won't forget, one student said, I wish I had this on the first day of my studies because it's helped so much explain to me why it is that I feel vulnerable as I design, but also how designing makes me feel quite empowered to improve the world around me. So there are 10 principles that we were able to distill out of all the research data that we had. And I'll run you through these. So the first four, principle 1 to 4, are very much around knowing ourselves, who we are, where we've come from, and where we're feeling like we should be going. The second four principles, from principle 5 to principle 8, are around the way in which the design process in particular challenges us to think and to make. And the last two principles are around our relationship to community and society and how we actually locate ourselves in society. So I want to go through each one and we'll go through quickly and I'll just give you sort of a nice example of somebody who has really acted on this principle. So the first one is finding your purpose by embracing the journey. And here is Dr. Carl Semenjo. So Carl, he graduated as an industrial designer and he really didn't know where he was going, but all the time he was reacting to the problems that he was seeing in front of him, from the way in which medical devices become obsolete when they're not designed for context, to the fact that that ends up meaning that women are unable to receive critical care during very basic procedures. And so he was designing to deal with some of these problems, and he actually, shifted from being somebody who was very interested in design for the healthcare context to being a very big advocate for design for women's reproductive health. And I think this is a really nice example of somebody who doesn't necessarily know where they're going, but is always responsive and learning to the projects that they do. The second one is decisively going beyond your comfort zone. So this is really having this sense of, understanding that you have instincts and that you can listen to them, but that you should actually push yourself out there into the world and get your ideas tested and have that feedback. So here's Mimi Fuentes Flores. She was an amazing architect, employed in very good architect firms. And for her, she really had this sort of moment where she felt like, actually, I don't want to be, designing residential buildings. I'm really interested in design for inclusion and being able to make sure that people of all walks of life with all sorts of abilities are accounted for in the design process. So her big moment to decisively go beyond her comfort zone was actually going back to university to study a Master of Strategic Product Design, walking away from a really lucrative job and saying, actually, that's not what I need. There's something else that's there, and putting herself out there. And if you follow her journey, she's now really become a fantastic expert for inclusive design. Principle 3 is around being authentic to your identity and purpose. And this is kind of calling upon you to be quite courageous in terms of how you contribute through your ability as a designer. And sometimes this is also about saying no. So, testing something, doing something really authentically, and actually learning that maybe this isn't the right environment for you, or challenging the environment as well. So, here is Marcia Copt. And this particular case study, why am I studying design? It follows her as she moves through a design school, and she's learning about and having sort of a tense relationship between what the design school believes is good design and what she believes is good design. So there's this tension there occurring. And she takes really courageous steps to practice design very authentically in an institution that is expecting certain things from her. Number 4 is around fueling your appetite for change. So it's really about, cultivating the energy to go and do difficult work, and understanding that you're not always feeling really fresh when you design, especially if you're working with vulnerable groups. So I'm really inspired by Sophie Amalia Thorpe Dietrichson. She's doing a PhD on designing judicial reform for domestic violence victims. And throughout her process, she's really spent a lot of time with women who have been victims of domestic violence. So when she was speaking to me, she was saying, look, that just weighed so heavily on me that I needed to do profound work to help these people, but actually I didn't have the answers. So she really was making sure that she was keeping herself well, that she was talking to and making a community around her of people that she could talk to as a social designer. And she even banned impact meetings from conversations in her PhD, which I think is a really bold move. Number 5 is around sharing our unfinished work, and you cannot believe how many design students I've worked with that try to keep their work to themselves for fear of being judged. And actually, if you think about what design is, it's so important to share because actually that's when you can pull in all these sort of fragmented ideas that come together to give you coherence. And you also don't have to have all the solutions and ideas yourself. So here is Olivier de Gruyter. He designed this fantastic product called Jerry, and it inserts into a jerry can. And when you press down, the water is cleaned to sort of the 99th percentile. And then when the pump expresses up, it cleans itself of the sediment. Now, he had so much difficulty getting that pump to clean itself that actually the project sort of stopped. And it wasn't until he really approached new experts from hydrology and from the maritime sciences and material engineering that he was actually able to kind of have a breakthrough in his project. So share your unfinished work. You don't need to carry your projects on your own shoulders. Then it's around being reflexive to performance cultures. So many students will feel like they want to get high grades, that they want to be top of the class, and that this will help them get a job. And actually, that what that means is they forget about deeply learning to be a designer. They forget about making mistakes and being imperfect and challenging as well. So, but also if you go too far the other way, you're not able to kind of tap into a performance culture to kind of motivate yourself. So this idea of being reflexive is neither being part of it or being disconnected from it, but rather using it as you need to sort of access your best work. Number 7 is forming the right environment for feedback. So often our students will put their work up on the wall or they're on a presentation PowerPoint and they will stand, present, and then at the end, everyone claps and gives feedback. Forming the right environment for feedback is really about seeing the whole feedback moment as something that can be designed. So rather than just putting your work up on the wall, starting your presentation a bit differently, having a more engaging style where you can connect and stop halfway through, and making sure that you get the feedback you need, rather than not having any agency as a student in these moments. Number 8 is perhaps the most kind of quirky or vague, and that is around trusting and driving the process. So, this idea that when you've finished a day's work as a designer, you have this incomplete project. It's in an incomplete state, and that you can kind of put that to rest at the end of a day. You can switch off and you know that you can come back to it the next day. And I think it's really important for young designers to know that there is no such thing as perfection in a design project. That is an illusion that is not helpful. If we had perfection as designers, we'd get to the point where nothing needed to be improved. So just keep that in mind. Number 9 is around engaging and embracing the messiness of pluralism. And this is a really nice story of Sana Kaiser. She did her master thesis on the future of the urban forest. So she had this project with lots of different stakeholders. And she was thinking about designing a vision for them and then presenting to them later. But actually, we challenged her to involve them right from the start and to actually spend time with each stakeholder, mapping out their situation and their needs. And what she did was she got across the whole value chain. She found all these sort of interaction moments between organizations, and from there she was able to identify opportunities rather than to impress, a predefined vision on the system, if you like. And as a result of meeting them all, she became sort of the central person in this value chain who understood of all of their problems without being a member of any particular organization. So she really was able to become a leader in this project. And the last one is shaping a community and collective resilience. So this is really about making sure that you undertake micro daily actions of care for the people around you that you work with or that you study with, making sure that we have opportunities to talk intentionally about the way in which designing is difficult, makes us feel vulnerable, but also brings us hope and brings us together. So I've spoken about the 10 principles, and these are available online for free. There is a video there, but also the handbook is free online. This project was funded by the Dutch government. And you can click into one of the principles and you can actually go to specific, well, you get an explanation first of all, and then you can go to some specific activities where you can help students, sort of scaffold how they're thinking and applying this principle in the classroom. The other thing that we've developed is a set of podcasts that kind of go a bit more into some of the principles. Um, and that's really nice for learning on the go, as I like to say. The ways in which students have used these, well, in particular, around this idea of reflecting at the end of the project. Here, Klaska, one of the master's thesis students I supervised, she, at the end of her project, reflected using each of the principles. I also had a student rip apart the handbook and place all the principles on their wall above their desk where they studied. Thought that was quite interesting. And there are people and organizations already picking up and using this handbook and the principles. So a big thank you for the World Design Organization for helping me in particular and supporting me very early on. But then there are organizations from the Netherlands to the UK to Australia that are also picking up and using this work. So thank you to those people there. A little bit of early feedback. People have been reaching out to me in an unsolicited way, which I always find interesting, telling me how important the project and the principles have been. And so I really, I'm getting a sense that it's really important, but I have to be resilient myself because I don't always know how valuable this can be. So please, if you've used the principles, you've used the handbook, please let me know what it was like, what I can improve, and that gives me a lot of motivation. So a call to you, it doesn't matter if you're a student, an educator, somebody who runs a practice, somebody doing research, please go ahead and use these principles. Develop your own because the 10 principles are not exhaustive. And let's get together a bit more often to talk about the way in which designing is both something that can be very difficult, but also something that is really, really an act of optimism for the world. So here they are, the 10 principles last time. You can access them online at theresilientdesigners.com. I want to wish you a happy World Industrial Design Day and thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my talk in particular. Okay, thank you very much.